Okay, it's 9:02, so I think we'll get started. But I know there are folks that are letting people in if we have others joining us. So good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Krista Siringo, and I am a Bristol rep to the Mount Aid School Board, and I'm also the chair of the Community Engagement Committee. And I'm really grateful to see folks here and looking forward to having another meeting like this tomorrow evening. So we appreciate your participation in this process of figuring out how best to plan for our school district moving forward. It's a process that the board has been thinking about and pondering for some time now. And in the past 18 months or so, we've engaged the community in a variety of ways as we move through this work. And it's been really important to us to ensure that people have the information they need and the chance to provide input as we think about next steps. So our hope today is that you can get a better sense of the recommendation that Superintendent Patrick Green shared with the board on Monday, and have a chance to ask questions about that and any other questions about the process or other options that are being considered. And let the board know what it is that you're thinking about and what's on your mind. So we've been playing around with the Zoom format. We're all getting a lot more familiar with Zoom than we were in March, but it's still a bit of a work in progress. So today this meeting is being held as a Zoom meeting. So the great news is we can see everyone's faces, or at least however many can fit on your screen at one time. It makes it a little bit for Q&A. So you'll notice that we have off the chat function, and we've done that because we feel like it's a bit distracting to the conversation and to folks really being present with what's being shared. But we are going to have some folks facilitating this morning to help us with ensuring that you have a chance to ask your question or share your comment. And so Shannon Warden, the principal from Mount Aid, is going to talk a little bit more about how that tech piece is going to work. But just know that we're doing it a little bit differently. We think it'll work well. But you will have a chance, if you don't get to share your comment or question in this meeting, we do have an email address set up and an FAQ, a frequently asked questions section of our website, where we're hoping to capture additional questions that folks have and answers to those questions. So I just want to take a moment. I'm going to share my screen just to review quickly the process and where we're at in a diagram that I think is helpful for folks that have questions. And I'm going to see if I can't figure out how to share my screen. Let's see. Okay. Adora, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that? Great. Okay. So some of you may have been at the board meeting on December 7th, last Monday, where Superintendent Green presented a lot of background information, different options that we are considering, and then his particular recommendation to the school board. And the board had a chance to ask questions and make comments about that. Today and tomorrow evening are a similar presentation to the community, a more abbreviated version, so that we ensure you have time to really interact with that information and ask your questions and make your comments about that. After those two meetings, the school board is going to be submitting or distributing a survey both electronically and in person to all residents of our 5-town community. And I'm going to share the link to that in a moment. But it will be posted in all the usual places as well. And so this is going to be the best way for you to provide your input into what we're specifically contemplating. So we strongly encourage you to make sure that you, your neighbors, your friends all fill that out. The more people that complete that survey, the more robust the data will be, and the better informed the board will be about the myriad opinions and feelings of folks in our community about how we move forward in this process. So, and then on January 20th, the school board is going to be meeting. We will, the window for the survey is closing, I believe, around January 10th. And then that data will be analyzed and shared with the school board. And we'll be meeting on January 20th to review that data and any additional information and to decide what next. So whether we will accept the recommendation of our superintendent or whether we'll do something different. If there is a decision to put a vote on a ballot, that would be on town meeting day. And let's see if I can figure out. Okay, and so then the last thing I want to share are some links that, one to the email where you can submit your questions, one to the spot on the MAUSD website where you can view answers to some of those questions. And then the third is the link to the survey. And again, this will be shared out in all the usual ways and on the MAUSD website. So if you're not able to quickly jot down the link right now, that's okay. But do know that when you see it, we really hope that you'll complete it. So that's all I have for you. Again, we're really glad you're here. And I believe I'm turning it over to Shannon Worden to add anything else she has on the tech end.
Good morning, everybody. Just a couple of housekeeping things. On the bottom of your screen, you'll see some control buttons, one of which is mute and unmute. We ask that you stay muted throughout the meeting so that there is no background noise. And when you get called on, if you have a question later on, you will unmute and then mute again so that you can ask your question, but that just helps everybody else hear a little more clearly. After the presentation part of this, we will start to take questions, and the way that we will do that, also on the bottom, there is a button for participants. Right now it says participants 51, and if you press on that, you are going to see over on the right hand side a list of names, and under the names there is a button to raise your virtual hand. And when you raise your virtual hand, it's going to put a little blue hand up next to your name. That is how we will know that you have a question, and we will jot your name down and put you in the queue to call on. Once we get you in the queue, we're going to lower your virtual hand. You can see Justin just raised his virtual hand. And once I get his name, or we get his name down, we will lower his hand. That's how you will know that you are in the queue to ask a question. Once we get to you, if we've asked that question, you can just unmute and say pass, and we will move on to the next person. We'll know that your question was already asked and answered. And then if you have another one further on in the presentation, go ahead and raise your virtual hand. Again, it's the first time we've done it like this, so please just be patient with us, and we will see how it goes. The other thing that you might want to do as we move through this is change how you see everybody, because right now, at least on my screen, I'm up to 3 pages of Brady Bunch squares. So at the top right hand corner of where you see the Brady Bunch boxes is speaker view or the grid view. So if you change that, it will show speaker view, will give you just who the person speaking is. It will put them front and center so that you can see who's speaking, or if you like the grid view, you can go back and forth. All right, and if you have any technical issues, you can just send, if you'd like to send me an email, I'll keep that screen open as well and try to help you out that way. Thanks so much for being here.
All right, thank you, Shannon and Krista, for those words getting us started today. And thanks to everyone for being here and taking the time out to learn more about the proposal and kind of the direction we're talking about going in as a school district. So last week, my name's Patrick Green, I'm superintendent for MAUSD. And last week I recommended action that I think the MAUSD board should take to help provide our students with the best education possible in light of anticipated financial challenges. My recommendation takes into consideration the thoughts, opinions, and beliefs that I've gathered from the hundreds upon hundreds of conversations I've had with a wide variety of community members. It also reflects my knowledge of our education system, ways in which we need to grow to support our students, and the harsh realities of our financial future. I made clear the path I think we should follow, and I also articulated alternative paths with the goal of helping the board and our community understand what might be expected for our future, depending on which path we may choose. The recommendation I made didn't come easily to me. There are many competing interests to consider and a lot of emotions connected to these interests. I wish we were not in a position to have to make hard decisions regarding our future, but unfortunately we are. Much as I would love to hand the responsibility of making a recommendation off to someone else, I accept the board's directive that I make a recommendation, and I accept the responsibility I hold as superintendent to lead MAUSD. So I'm confident in my recommendation. I know it has landed hard for some, while others may feel relieved. My recommendation calls upon us to face our challenges head on and take action to move us forward toward a more positive future for our students than I believe we'll realize if we make no plan and take no action. As I shared last week, taking no action will result in several dozen positions being eliminated without a long-range plan to preserve support and services for our students. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now, and again, an abbreviated version of the presentation from last week. The intent here is to really get more kind of dialed into the recommendation, not so much the context and the alternative paths. And the idea behind that is to leave more time for the Q&A, to really try and be responsive to those thoughts and questions that people have. So there is no doubt that we're at a critical juncture as a school district and as a community. Our enrollment has been declining for years and is projected to continue to decline. Declining enrollment results in reducing the amount we can spend before paying tax penalties. Without reducing spending, we're facing millions of dollars in annual tax penalties and tax increases of 70 to 90% over the next 5 years. Assuming our taxpayers aren't interested in that level of taxation, we're left with a need to reduce spending. With personnel costs making up approximately 75% of our total budget, every situation involving significant spending cuts is primarily driven by personnel reductions. With the possibility of needing to reduce spending by as much as $8.7 million over the next 5 years, this would mean a reduction of approximately 91 positions. That's about 1/3 of our staff. Making this kind of reduction in staff without restructuring will lead to significantly reduced support and services for our students. Knowing this, we can either cling to as much of what we have now as possible while we reduce dozens and dozens of positions, or we can look for ways to operate differently with fewer staff as we pursue improved outcomes for our students. My recommendation is to face this challenge head on and from a possibilities mindset rather than deficit mindset. My intent is to light a path for us that allows us to build something together as a community, a path that meets our financial challenges and is focused on improving outcomes for our students. It is, however, not without having to make hard decisions. I know many people desperately want to keep everything the way it is. We all want to hold on dearly to the image of our town school as we know it now or as we once knew it. The sad reality is that is just not an option. If we do not act swiftly and significantly, the schools everyone knows and loves now, or perhaps remember from their past, will be just a shell of what they are or once were. Letting the support and services we provide our students rapidly deteriorate until everyone's unhappy enough with them that we're willing to make change is irresponsible and harmful to students. As our foremothers and forefathers did before us, I encourage us to make the hard decisions we need to make now to help ensure we provide all of our children with the best future we can. That's why I recommended the MAUSD board take a phased approach, providing an opportunity for us to develop innovative ways to educate our children. To start us down this path, phase 1 of my recommendation requires us to repurpose our schools to ensure our students continue to receive outstanding core instruction, high quality intervention, and top-notch related arts experiences, while also charging our educational leaders to work with students, staff, and the community to co-create innovative programming available to all students, which may provide an experiential, project or performance-based hands-on experience. Katrina DiNapoli, Assistant Superintendent, is going to be talking more about this vision in a few minutes. Phase 2 would be to merge districts with Addison Northwest. This would begin by the MAUSD and Addison Northwest boards acting swiftly to form a merger study committee. Then, over the next several months, the study committee would develop articles of agreement that would need to be approved by the State Board of Ed. Assuming they get approved, each board would then have to decide to warn a vote of each community for a merger. A yes from the commingled votes of the 5 towns in MAUSD and a yes from the commingled votes of the 5 towns in Addison Northwest would result in forming a newly merged district. Ideally, this newly merged district would become operational on July 1st of 2023 in order to benefit from the financial savings before support and services for students are lost. This newly merged district would allow middle and high school students to access a more robust program of studies than we can offer now. This would all be possible by creating savings from staffing efficiencies at the central office level, as well as at the middle and high school levels. In short, middle and high school programs improve and taxpayers save money. If we don't merge, we will lose middle and high school programs. This merger would also be necessary to be able to sustain the innovative programming in phase 1 of my recommendation. All students in the newly merged district would be able to access the programming described in phase 1. So let's take a little bit closer look at phase 1 of my proposal. In phase 1, Moncton Central School and Bristol Elementary School would become K-5 schools serving students from all 5 towns. These 2 schools are where all K-5 students from all 5 towns would spend most of their time. Beeman would be the site of an enhanced early education ELP childcare partnership and central office. Robinson and Lincoln would become innovation sites where the programming that would be co-created would take place. 6th graders would have an aid, making it a 6-12 school. This would offer 6th graders access to the kinds of programming currently available to middle schoolers. Moncton and Bristol were selected as 2 sites to operate K-5 schools for a few reasons. First, it seems important to keep a northern campus and a southern campus to mitigate travel concerns. The 2 northern campuses are Moncton and Robinson. Moncton has capacity for more students as defined by the NESDEC study that was produced and is already very accessible to students being on a single level. Adults and visitors with mobility challenges also would benefit from the accessibility of that Moncton Central School campus. To make Robinson more fully accessible would require hundreds of thousands of dollars in renovation costs to connect the 2 parts of the building in a universally accessible way. Of the 3 sites that could be considered our southerly facilities, Bristol has by far the greatest capacity for students, has a separate gym and cafeteria, is most centrally located, and requires less transportation given the number of students who live in the village of Bristol. Beeman was chosen as the location for the Early Ed and ELP childcare partnership and central office because it's most centrally located in the event the 2 districts merge and is relatively close in proximity to Mount Abe and Bristol Elementary, where a very large percentage of our students would be located. So if we take a look at Bristol Elementary School as a K-5, this is what it could look like. And I want to remind everyone that what you see here reflects many assumptions and projections. None of this is set in stone. A lot of tuning would still be needed. It's intended to paint a picture of what could be as we consider what direction to take. Having said that, effort was put in to ensure that the FTEs that you're seeing here, the full-time equivalencies, are reasonable based on the student enrollment projections and the education quality standards. As you can see, there would be about 351 students in the 22-23 school year. Class sizes would average 19.5 students. Kindergarten classes would be able to retain an instructional assistant. Students would benefit from access to a full-time nurse and a full-time counselor. All students would receive health education, which is not currently afforded to all students. Staffing would include robust supports for students from behavior support personnel, interventionists, and special educators. Classroom teachers would still be able to benefit from the support provided by 2 instructional coaches. Special area staffing levels would be sufficient to support student needs, provide flexibility in scheduling, and help ensure we meet contractual planning time requirements for classroom teachers. As you can see here, indicated by the green boxes, the building is well utilized with room for growth. According to NESDEC, Bristol has a possible planned operating capacity of 459 students. At 351 students, BES would be operating at 76% of its planned operating capacity. When we take a look at Moncton Central School as a K-5 school, in the 22-23 school year, there'd be approximately 171 students. Class sizes at the K2 level would be in the 17 to 19 range, while class sizes at the 3-5 level would be 20 to 23. Average class size across the school, which is reflected here, would be 19 students. Kindergarten classes, again, would be able to retain an instructional assistant. Students would benefit from access to a full-time nurse and a full-time counselor. They'd receive robust health education, which is not currently afforded to all students. They would also receive, staffing would include robust supports for students from behavior support personnel, interventionists, and special educators. Classroom teachers would still be able to benefit from the support provided by an instructional coach. Again, special area staffing levels would be sufficient to support the student needs, provide flexibility in scheduling, and help ensure we meet the contractual planning time. As you can see here, again, indicated by the green boxes, the building is well utilized with room for growth. According to NESDEC, Moncton has a possible planned operating capacity of 235. At 171 students, Moncton would be operating at 73% of the planned operating capacity. And I want to mention, we're not going to really get too deep into the alternates, though if questions come up about them, we can certainly discuss. I mentioned the access to resources students would benefit from here, because in some of the alternates, depending on how we approach this, those same benefits are and that same staffing level are not things that students would necessarily be able to have access to because of the reduction in staff. So sticking with phase 1, talking a little bit about Mount Abe. Mount Abe would look essentially the same as it does now. The staffing levels would, even though they'd be taking in another grade with approximately 98 students. Some shuffling of classrooms is likely needed to create more of a little bit larger middle school section of the building so that we can be sure that it accommodates the added students. But the details of that planning would be taking place over the next year and a half if this is the direction the board wanted to go in. It's really in phase 2 that we would see the additional staffing efficiencies from the Mount Abe reconfiguration. And that's in the merger, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But with 6th graders at Mount Abe, the enrollment is projected to be approximately 701 students in the 22-23 school year. According to NESDEC, Mount Abe has a planned operating capacity of 970 students. So at 701 students, Mount Abe would be operating at 72% of the planned operating capacity. So that kind of gives you a sense of kind of an overview of phase 1 in terms of what the K-5 and the 6-12 facilities would look like, and a little sense of kind of what staffing could be. But I want to dig into a little deeper into 2 aspects of phase 1, and that is the early ed and ELP childcare partnership and the innovation sites. So to start that, I want to invite Mandy Chesley Park, who's the director of the MAUSD Expanded Learning Program, to talk more about the enhanced early ed and ELP childcare partnership that I mentioned in phase 1.
Great, thank you, Patrick. I know we're going to move to a new slide.
Yes, just need to get over to that screen. There we go.
Perfect, thank you. Those are the faces. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. Again, my name is Mandy Chesley Park. I direct the Expanded Learning Program for MAUSD. Many of you are likely familiar with our work, but just in summary, over the last 8 years, we've been providing after school and summer programming for school-age students, K through 6th grade. Our programs emphasize exploration, play, creativity, and we align ourselves very intentionally with MAUSD's strategic plan. So we work to develop opportunities for our students beyond school day hours to continue their learning, their education, and And hopefully and often we see that we are able to present materials in a way that may light and kindle a different type of fire in our students. So it's really gratifying work, and we're so grateful to be a part of the school district serving our 5 towns. Just a quick, overview of our work with 3 to 5-year-olds. It's new to us. We started this during in March when we all faced COVID-19 and the pandemic. We were asked by the state, the Child Development Division, to serve 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, as we were one of the very few programs in the state of Vermont serving students of essential workers during that time. Since March, we have served 3, 4, and 5-year-olds without interruption, and continue to serve in a childcare capacity. And I want to be clear about that as we move through a couple of the points on the next slide. Thank you. Great. So just a little bit about the partnership. So we have a strong early ed program at MAUSD. My own daughter has attended that program. It is a 10-hour program at Bristol Elementary School right now that has incredibly high quality staff, and the work that they do, I have seen directly impact my own daughter's life. It's powerful. At the Expanded Learning Program, we are always thinking about working families. And one thing that we've been pondering over the last year is access for working families to be able to participate in this 10-hour-a-week strong early ed program housed at Bristol Elementary School at MAUSD. So this partnership, looking at this effort of repurposing the Beeman Elementary School, would be an effort to solve that problem. We look to offer full day programming for families, so their 3, 4, and 5-year-olds can attend this high quality early ed pre-K program and benefit from wraparound childcare provided by the Expanded Learning Program. So working families who need to, leave and be able to have a place for their students from 7:30 to 5:30 can find a home and access strong programs. But that's really important to understand. I have many children, if you know me, and I have children who have attended other pre-K programs in the district, and they are vital. Our work here and our intention is to provide additional childcare for existing families in the MAUSD early education program. So that's key. Of course, I already said who we would serve, and those are 3, 4, and 5-year-olds who are enrolled in the MAUSD early education classroom. Where would we host this? Patrick spoke to this a little bit. Looking to host this at Beeman Elementary School. This campus offers a lot more space for this type of programming. And again, as Patrick mentioned, is centrally located in the event that a merger with ANWSD necessitates additional classrooms. We're already positioned in that space. In this partnership and moving forward, I want to focus on what we would look forward to. And so this would provide increased options for preschoolers in the early education classroom to access wraparound expanded learning program childcare. And what we do, as I mentioned before, is we emphasize exploration. We encourage kids to be curious, to move their bodies, to play, and to learn. So that, coupled in partnership with the early ed program, would provide our students a strong option for working parents to access this. And we all know from our early ed data how important it is for this access to be made manifest for our students to thrive in an early ed program. So that's a little bit more about what we're looking to do and offer in this partnership at Beeman Elementary.
Great, thank you, Mandy. So now I'd like to invite Katrina DiNapoli, Assistant Superintendent in charge of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, to talk more about some of the possibilities for the innovation sites that I referenced in phase 1.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As Patrick explained, I'm here to share a little bit more about the concept of innovation sites. First, why are we exploring this idea? In addition to everything Patrick has already shared, MAUSD may have the opportunity to repurpose school buildings to offer innovative programming that complements, enhances, and supports teaching and learning. How might we do that? By modestly staffing 2 sites, by collaborating with teachers and students, and by designing hands-on project and/or performance-based experiences for kids. We'll also want to ensure that the experiences we provide are aligned to standards, student-centered, and resourced appropriately. The idea is that the sites can be accessed by pre-K-12 students throughout the school year. Switch. Thank you. An essential question to consider when and if we begin co-creating these sites in committees will be, what need might an in-district innovation site meet? Consider all of the places teachers look to supplement or enhance their curriculum now. I've listed just a few here, and if you don't know what some of them are, when the slides are published, you can explore the links that I've provided. These collaborations happen through field trips, companion workshops, and by bringing folks from places like these into our schools, pre-COVID, of course. Many of our schools have designed innovative spaces inside and outside of their buildings as well. And while experiences like these and others are often amazing, they can be cost prohibitive and not accessible to all students and all schools. How might we collaborate and learn from these and other resources to grow our own internal capacity and design an in-house program accessible to all? Next. So let's take a deeper dive into an innovation site idea to help paint the picture. Please remember, this is just an idea. We are not planning these innovation sites in a vacuum. We want to have these co-created innovation sites to be inclusive of certainly educators and students. But let's take an idea through. One of the innovation sites could be a STEM center. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. It could be staffed by a director, 2 teachers, an administrative assistant, and a custodian. The trio of educators can design a menu of experiences, lessons, and activities that teachers and students can access as they plan for their year. The director can also be available to meet with teachers, teams, and students to customize an immersion experience that fits with their curriculum, attainment of their proficiencies, and schedules. The goal here is that all students in grades pre-K-8 access a STEM center collaboration at least once in the school year. Students in grades 9 through 12 will have access to a STEM center collaboration also. That might look different. It might be by a class. It might also be something like, as I'm going to speak to in just a minute, an independent learning opportunity. This access can look a multitude of ways where the STEM teachers can come into the school and work in partnership with the school-based teachers on foundational lessons, building up to potentially a week-long experience at the innovation site. Once there, they could have access to equipment to design and create a product that will showcase their learning. And as I mentioned, a high school student may choose to do an independent learning opportunity at the innovation site, honing their skills with a STEM teacher mentor and helping to support younger students when they come to visit. These are just a couple of examples. There are certainly many ways a collaboration like this could work. There is another thought that we were having about how to partner with something like the Bristol Rec Department so that we could open up the site for adult classes in the evenings or over the summer. That could be explored as well. So if our school board decides to support the superintendent's recommendation to repurpose 2 elementary schools as pre-K-12 innovation sites, it will be vital to pull together a planning committee to study these possibilities much more closely. We will need to engage all constituents and design an implementation plan that can work for teachers and students. In fact, student voice will be critical in the design because I am sure that they will be able to come up with innovative ideas that many of us can't even imagine. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Katrina. So hopefully hearing from Katrina and Mandy helped elaborate a little bit more on some of the aspects of phase 1 that I mentioned. And I want to take a minute here just to acknowledge that my proposal for repurposing schools in phase 1 absolutely may feel to some like an attempt to avoid having towns vote on school closure. And I can certainly appreciate that perspective. The reality is, for the longest time, I could not see a path forward that did not involve school closure. After many months of community conversations indicating to me towns did not want to see their schools closed, it really hit home in my conversations with select boards and community members. I was able to understand more clearly the value maintaining a school adds to a town. This prompted me to kind of go back to the drawing board to find a way to achieve the savings we need, that seems very real, while working to improve outcomes for students, which is a must, without closing schools. Now, I recognize the repurposing that I'm proposing is not the same as keeping town schools operating as they are today. However, I do feel this proposal more closely aligns with what I heard from our communities than a recommendation to close schools permanently would. That is the spirit in which I recommend phase one, not as a way to avoid a community vote. So I want to talk now about the financial projections regarding phase one. So as we look at, and again, this is an abbreviated version of what was shared last week, but as we look at the financial impact of repurposing schools for FY23, so that's the 22-23 school year. And this is talking about with and without the impact of the weighting study changes or the weighting changes that I explained last week. As you can see here, phase one is projected to essentially be sustainable for FY23, regardless of which way some of those variables I referenced last week go. So you can see that if there is no weighting change for FY23, we're looking at just under $1 million to almost $2.5 million possibly being under the spending threshold. If the weighting changes happen and take effect fully by FY23, we might be over by just a bit at $325,000, but could also be under the spending threshold by as much as $1.5 million, again, depending on which direction several variables may go. Now here we see a summary of the same scenario, same phase one, but now looking out to FY26. That's the 2025-26 school year. As we can see, the phase one really isn't sustainable out to FY26 as a standalone measure. So without the weighting changes, we're looking at being over the spending threshold by anywhere from $250,000 or so to as much as $2.5 million. And with the weighting changes, could be over the spending threshold by as much as 1.4 to 3.9 million. So phase one alone, unfortunately, isn't sustainable out as far as FY26. And that's why phase two becomes really important. So let's take a little bit closer look at phase two, which is where we would merge with Addison Northwest, which would have an impact on central office staffing and have an impact on middle and high school staffing primarily. Find my cursor again. So in a merged district in phase two, all the elementary schools in MAUSD could be used the same way as they are in phase one. The exception being that Beeman could be the early ed, childcare, and central office for the newly formed district rather than just for MAUSD. All students in the newly formed district would be able to access the innovative programs at Robinson and Lincoln. Hypothetically, Ferrisburg and Virgins Union Elementary Schools could be K-5 schools, with all 6-8 students from the newly merged district attending school at the Virgins Union Middle High School campus, and all the 9 through 12 students attending school at the Mount Abe campus. I say this only to help everyone begin to imagine what this could be like. It's purely based on a larger footprint at Mount Abe and the fact that there are more students in a 9-12 than a 6-8. Which school would actually be the high school and which would actually be the middle school would need further study. The anticipated enrollment in a merged 6 through 8 middle school is approximately 475 students. The anticipated enrollment in a merged 9 through 12 high school is approximately 700 students. In this scenario, the Addison Central School campus could continue to provide the same programming as is happening now at the Addison Wayfinder Experience, which is a program that provides an alternative education for Addison County students in grades 7 through 12. Without a merger, middle and high school students will see significant reductions in programs across content areas, including English, math, science, social studies, art, music, world language, design technology, athletics, and activities. Additionally, students would have reduced access to supports such as special education, intervention, behavior supports, guidance, and nursing. With a merger, middle and high school students would maintain programming in all of these areas and actually likely see expansions in programming in some of these areas. So here we see a summary of phase 2 projected out to FY26 to see how sustainable this plan is, again, with and without factoring in the weighting change. As you can see, this plan is essentially sustainable out to FY26 without the weighting study, even if some of those other factors don't go our way. However, when we factor in the weighting study, it looks like we will need some of those other factors to go our way to sustain this plan. I'll add here what my crystal ball prediction is, which is that I think the change to the weighting formula is likely to happen. I think that's going to be a version of reality for us. Exactly what the weighting formula change may be is unclear, but we do think there's going to be a change, and it is almost certainly, if there is a change, going to impact Addison, the Addison County, really, MAUSD specifically, in a way that reduces our ability to spend. I do also think that the change to the special education block grant will happen. For us, that's a benefit of, somewhere just shy of 300,000 is our projection. So that helps. I'm less confident, but I'm actually quite optimistic that the removal of the construction costs from our equalized pupil calculation is going to happen. Though that's an area that advocating to the legislature could be really helpful. That would benefit us by about $1 million in terms of our cost per equalized pupil. I really have no indication what's going to happen with any adjustment to the spending threshold. I know it's in the authority of the legislator to change what ended up being a very small increase to what we're allowed to spend per equalized pupil, which again has a negative impact on our ability to spend going forward. So I don't really know where that's going to go, but again, this could be an area where advocating to the legislature could be helpful. So this is a little kind of an abbreviated version of the presentation from the other night, but I think what's really important is to review the decision-making authority in terms of how this all moves forward. So the community has the authority, and this is specifically the town where the school sits, has the authority to vote to close an elementary school. That means it doesn't operate as an educational site any longer. In that case, the town would have the option to purchase the facility for $1, taking in all of its debt and everything that comes along with that. The 5-town electorate, in a commingled manner, approves any budget amount that the board gets to put forward. And the 5-town electorate, again, in a commingled manner, would have to approve any merger decision with Addison Northwest. The school board authority is to determine what, if anything, to ask community members to vote on. The school board has the authority to repurpose schools. The school board has the authority to determine what budget amount to ask voters for, and they have the authority to decide whether or not to form a merger study committee. As superintendent, my authority rests really solely on how to spend the money that the board decides to put before the voters that ultimately gets approved. So I know that can be confusing sometimes. I think it's important to continue to revisit the authority. And as we think about next steps, obviously I've made my recommendation. We're now in our community informational meetings. And as Krista mentioned, really later today, the electronic survey is going to be made available. And next week, we're planning to get the paper version of that survey distributed through the mail. In January, the board's going to review those survey results and decide what, if anything, to put on the town meeting day ballot. Then in February, the idea is that there would be more community engagement. And March, if there's a need for a vote of the electorate, then that's when it would happen, would be on town meeting day. And I think with that, I can stop sharing my screen and we can turn it over to some Q&A.
Okay, thank you everyone for listening and for attending. It's really great to have you here. The more informed people are, the better decisions will be made down the road. And we have some questions that have been submitted in writing prior to this meeting. We're going to start with those and then we'll be calling on people with raised hands. So you would follow Shannon's instructions on how to raise your hand. Once you press on the participant button and then look at the lower right hand of your screen, you can find a way to raise your hand. So the first question for Patrick is, has the district considered closing Mount Abe, making our town schools K through 8, and then tuitioning out our high school students?
Yeah, so this idea actually came up last fall, relatively early in the community engagement process. And as we looked into this, the reality is, you know, as we think about first our 5 current elementary or K-6 or pre-K-6 buildings, what it would take to make those facilities really conducive to the kind of middle level education we're looking for, there'd be some upfit costs to each of those facilities to really make that work well. Additionally, there's some cost in the inefficiencies in trying to, say, deliver middle level science to students across 5 schools. So there'd be a cost associated with that. When we look at the secondary level, so we'd be tuitioning our high school students out to another school district somewhere, however that works, whichever school they would be attending. And the tuition that we would be paying, it could range, you know, different districts have different tuition rates that they establish. But embedded in those tuition rates are the costs associated with maintaining their programming, their personnel, their facilities. So instead of putting dollars into sort of almost a tuition or a cost per pupil into our own facilities and our own programming that we manage, we'd be putting similar dollars into tuition that goes out to other districts that we have less control over, less responsibility for, but also are still paying for those facilities costs and needs that arise as all buildings in Vermont are aging. The Mount Abe has facilities needs for sure. They're improving. Those needs are far less than they were 3 years ago, 4 years ago, thanks to the work that's being done there and the money that's been put into the regular budget, the general budget, to address some of those needs. But it's not unique in that it has needs. You know, multiple other school districts have been seeking bonds. For example, Winooski's in the process of construction right now, having a bond approved. Burlington has approved a bond. South Burlington is seeking a bond. There are facilities needs throughout the state. This is a really hot topic as well at a state level. So it's inescapable to be paying some way, somehow for facilities needs if we're tuitioning our students out. And so when we factor all of that in, that idea of closing Mount Abe and making our elementary schools K-8 schools really isn't a cost savings measure to the extent that we're looking for, at least. So that level of analysis led us to realize that wasn't worth pursuing and investing many, many, many hours into fleshing out even more fully.
Have you considered using our school buildings to rent out extra space to individuals or businesses as a way to increase revenue in our district?
We have. This is an idea that came up relatively early on in the process as well. So we reached out to a local businessman who kind of has their finger on the pulse of kind of the going rate for leasing space like was proposed. And what we found was I don't have the exact terms, but at the going rate for lease, we would need to lease effectively more classrooms than we have in total for that to be a significant cost contributor or revenue generator to help address our financial challenges. So that there are other benefits to looking at that in terms of sort of services and the community aspect, but from a financial perspective, that wasn't going to be something we could lean on at all for a solution to the financial challenge.
Can the current superintendent's office be located in 1 or 2 schools so that we do not pay out that money for the lease to use the current building?
Absolutely. And that is something that we need to do really regardless of what direction the board goes. That obviously in my proposal, there's a recommendation to move central office into Beaman. I think regardless of the board accepting that recommendation or taking a different direction, we need to utilize the space that we own for central office and not continue to pay lease dollars to rent a space for it. The ideal would be, I think, to have a long range plan that we could then make that move once and do it well, and have confidence that it would be able to stay where we move to. It's costly to move spaces like that. So if it can fit into a long range plan, that's better. If we can't get a long range plan together, then I think we would need to still make that move and incur those costs to avoid paying the lease.
What is the projected increase in cost of busing students if one of the schools is closed or repurposed?
So I've reached out directly to our busing company and had that conversation and talked about, as we think about utilizing our schools differently, and this is really thinking phase one, what could we expect a relative cost increase to be? And as they were talking it through, they said, it's effectively the same number of buses. It may be different routes going to the same 5 towns. Their assessment was that there wouldn't be a significant cost impact to a reconfiguration in phase one that we've talked about.
If school buildings are closed, how will they be used in the future?
So if school buildings are closed, those buildings again are offered to the town where they sit for $1. The town then has the decision making. They own the building and they would get to decide what to do with that building. The town would have to operate it, as it states in our articles of agreement. They'd have to operate it for town purposes, whatever that may be, for 5 years before they could choose to sell it. If they chose to sell it prior to the 5 years, then any investment that the district has made since merger in that facility would have to be repaid as part of the sale. But after 5 years, the town could sell it, could continue to operate it, do whatever they would need to or choose to with that facility. If the town refuses the purchase of the building and the assumption of its debt and those sorts of things, then the school district retains the property, and the school district then has the authority to sell the property or do whatever it decides.
In phase one, do some Starksboro and some Lincoln K-5 students attend school in Bristol or Moncton?
Yeah, so that could be. There's further study that needs to be done, and there are different pros and cons that we would want to consider. There are benefits to sort of equally distributing or equitably distributing students into the 2 schools so that we're utilizing roughly the same % of the capacity of those buildings, so that we don't have one that's kind of more overfull and one that's less full. And there are benefits to looking at proximity, right? So I'm thinking, a student who lives in South Starksboro is probably quite a bit closer to Bristol Elementary than they would be to Moncton. So there are advantages to that student going to the school that's closer. On the flip side, there are advantages to all students from a town staying together in the same building. So those are some of the things we would want to look at. The figures that I was presenting assumed that that there was more of an equal distribution into the 2 schools, and as you saw, utilizing about the same % of the capacity. But we would want to talk through more about what does that look like and what would be best for families and for students as we consider where students would go.
The program that Virgins currently runs at Willowell, the Walden program, similar to what you might see at an innovation site?
Yeah, it could very well be. That's a really sort of a outdoor sort of humanities kind of program, hands-on. That sort of approach, that sort of thinking absolutely could be the kind of program that could evolve in this co-creation process. Again, it's hard to say what will be with any certainty because, again, we're trying to co-create something here, not rolling out a predetermined program or option.
I'm wondering what the point is of housing the innovation academies at schools that would otherwise be closed.
Yeah, the point really is to enable those spaces, those two facilities, to really have that focus and be designed intentionally to provide the kind of programming that we would look to build there. I think it can be more challenging to build within a school that has its own structures and routines and schedules, something that operates very differently. And that can put some constraints on what might otherwise be a more sort of innovative kind of programming. And as we're talking about trying to do something here, I think it's best to not have the constraints. So there's a benefit to the program from my perspective by being in its own space and designing that space to fit its needs. And I think there's also the benefit to the community that on a very regular basis, perhaps almost daily, to have students in that building and have that kind of activity in that space that people appreciate so much. The opportunities for community to come and see students working and the student presentations that may happen as sort of the culminating event of the time there. All of those factors I think are really important as well in utilizing those space.
Okay, now we have a speakers list. Right now we have 7 people on it. So if you're one of those 7, prepare to unmute yourself. If you feel that your question has already been answered, you can pass. Otherwise, share your question and we'll see where this goes. So the first question asker is Coco Mosley.
Hello, I'm a resident of Lincoln and the mother of a 2-year-old. First off, I want to express my real distaste for this proposal. I really do not support the concept of innovation sites. I feel like it's a real sort of tricky way of actually closing the school and taking away the town vote. You know, that aside, my question really is my calculation for middle school from Lincoln, the time spent on a bus from Lincoln to Virgins is over 500 hours a year. And that's if it's just an hour on the bus. I really want to know, how is that innovative and how is that moral? And who has done the research on, you know, how that time on a bus is going to affect children? So that's my first question. And really, you know, my other question is for the board. As you hear from town community members, you know, and their feelings about this proposal, and especially from towns that are really slated to lose their elementary school, how are you taking that into consideration when you consider the proposal for, you know, repurposing the schools? Because when I look at the numbers on the school board, you know, it seems like there's 7 members that will retain an elementary school in their town and 6 that won't. And those numbers really scare me. So I want to hear from board members about how they are, you know, listening and understanding and how that's impacting the way they think about this proposal, even when it's not their town that's going to lose their elementary school. Thank you.
I can speak to the transportation portion and then turn it over to, I guess, either Krista or Don. I'm not sure who. You guys can be thinking about that in the meantime, I guess. So transportation, yeah, in that phase 2 is something that we need to really think carefully about. The interesting thing about transportation is there's nothing really fixed about that. Some of the transportation, the amount of time that students would spend on a bus can be mitigated by how many buses we run and what is the route for those buses. So kind of how it operates now, we work with our busing company to say, here's how long we think it's acceptable for students to be on a bus. You tell us to get kids from where they are to where they need to be. How many buses does that take? What are the routes going to be? And what's the cost associated with that? So we can take that same approach. In a merged district, we'd have the opportunity to look more holistically across the 2 districts to see what kinds of efficiencies could be created as we look at that sort of busing study a little bit differently. But we can start from a place of what do we think is an acceptable length of time on the bus.
What do you think is an acceptable length of time on a bus for a middle schooler?
So currently 45 minutes, and we don't differentiate middle schooler or high schooler or student. Currently it's 45 minutes that we kind of work backward from as our target.
Great. So it seems like you'll have a bus for each child in Lincoln to get to Virgins, because that's how long it takes. And that's from living pretty, central in the town of Lincoln, not even in the hinterlands.
So Krista or Don, I'm not sure who would like to respond to the board portion. Krista?
Sure. Hi, Coco. Thanks for being here. So I think from the board perspective, our goal is to hear input from as many community members as we can and to weigh all of that feedback. And so by participating in the survey, by attending the meeting, those are the most valuable ways for us to ensure that we're getting a really diverse and wide-ranging feedback from community members. So once we have a chance to look at the data from the survey, we'll be thinking about that and also thinking about all of the information presented by Patrick Green and his recommendation, as well as the process we undertook in the fall and the conversations that led to this point. So we're trying to be as thorough in the information gathering that we can be. So we feel pretty confident that we're hearing from a good representation of community members. And that includes folks that are maybe not necessarily able to attend these meetings, which is why the survey is really important.
Okay, our next speaker is Ruth Beecher.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for hosting these meetings for us. I think it's really important. I live in Starksboro. I've lived here for almost 37 years. I also taught at elementary school and Robinson School in Starksboro for almost 30 years. I did my student teaching there too, and I just retired in June and taught grades 1 through 6. So it's a little emotional because I really don't think it's a good idea to repurpose our elementary schools. I really feel the importance of having the wraparound services that we provide by knowing each and every single student, which obviously every school is going to do the best they can. If there's a larger amount of kids, they'll do the best they can. But living in town, teaching in town, I knew where every student lived and we could tell who might need more support. I feel like, having taught my last 2 years in 5-6, that 6th graders could handle the move easily. And I really am wondering if we could try to retain our K through 5 elementary schools and focus on the 6 through 12, so the middle school and high schools, for change, and to keep our elementary schools as they are. I feel like the innovation centers is a fantastic idea, but I also feel like every elementary school could become an expert and then teach others, become an expert. I was known as the field trip queen at my school, and the cost of busing for field trips is extremely expensive. So I'm wondering if you've looked at the price of busing kids to the innovation sites, if that does come to pass, and how they would get there and how much these buildings would be used as they're intended. So it would be a real shame to go through with all this, have these wonderful innovation sites, and then not have them be used. And then the other thought is, as a teacher, how would it be equitable to make sure all teachers are utilizing them and not just ones that pursue it? Because it's really hard to fit everything in that we're required to teach. I know as a Starksboro resident and taxpayer that change does need to happen, but I really don't think it should be at the expense of our K through 5 students. And busing, I live on the north side of Starksboro, and my daughter, when she did ride the bus, when she didn't want to ride in with me when it was not cool anymore, it took her 45 minutes when it's a 10 or 15 minute ride in a car. So I just can't believe it would be 45 minutes, no matter what, because it takes longer to get to our other towns. We're such an outlying 5-town district. So pardon my emotionalness, but this is a big change, and I really feel for all of us because it's a huge decision and lots on the table. I guess my question really is, how are we going to do this? I don't really know how to formulate it as a question. I think a lot of people have put it out on Front Porch Forum, the concerns that we have. And then the other part is, if it does come to pass, what's the price tag on the transportation to the district innovation sites? I'm unmuted.
So, first of all, hi, Ruth. I hope retirement's treating you well, and no need to apologize for the emotion. This is a very emotional thing. Your first question is the $1 million question. How are we going to do this? It's one I've been wrestling with for a year and a half or more now. And that really is the question. I think when you mention your time at Robinson and the efforts there to meet student need, and part of that is your intimate knowledge of the students and the relationship you have because of their close-knit community in Starksboro, which I think is similar to the kind of community experienced in the other 4 towns as well, based on my conversations with people in those towns. Another part of the ability to meet student need is that there are resources available within the school once you've identified a student who has need. The concern is if we're looking at 90 positions being reduced over the next 5 years, without some restructuring, without looking to efficiencies, those people who are in positions currently to provide that kind of support aren't there in the future. And that's really the concern as we wrestle with this reality of needing to find possibly $8.7 million in savings while helping to ensure that we have people in place in the buildings where kids attend to meet those needs. So that's the thinking behind the recommendation. I think that's it raises an important point for me. At the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We all want to make sure that our students are well cared for. We have different ideas about what that means and what it takes to do that, but that is what unites us. There are plenty of things that divide us as we work through these challenges. That unites us. I fully believe that's what we all want. And then it's a matter of figuring out how do we achieve that given the financial challenges that are ahead of us. When I think about your question about transportation, I think that's real. I think the transportation cost is less when it's going to the town next door than it is if it's going to, somewhere in Chittenden County or Southern Vermont or wherever the field trip queen may have gone in years past. But there is a cost associated with that, and we'd have to be considerate of that. We've put some money toward projected allocations for these innovation sites. It's as much a placeholder as it is anything, because we need to co-create what these look like. So part of that process can be considering those transportation costs so that we can ensure that these are programs that students can access, and it needs to be equitable. Your question about, how do we ensure it isn't just a small handful of teachers that access these sites is also a good one. And that's one that we would have to talk through. The idea here is that, instead of what currently happens in pockets and depending on which student and which sort of series of classrooms they're in or schools they're in, they can get a very different kind of experience right now because what we're doing happens in pockets. The intent here is to create more of a systemic approach to those kinds of experiences that you sought for your students in your field trips. And part of that is to make sure that it is not just accessible by, but accessed by our students. And trying to think about, is there a way to do somewhat more of a surface level experience for kids, but also simultaneously have a more in-depth opportunity for kids who really feel like they can thrive from that experience and can dig in a bit deeper. So it's sort of a both and approach with that. But the details, and this is the really hard part, we obviously can't speak to details that are confirmed for this thing that we need to co-create. The more details we say that are factual and confirmed today, the less co-creation we're leaving room for. And I think it's really important. And to me, one of the more exciting aspects of this is the co-creation process. Lots of people have lots of ideas about what could be or what needs are. Let's gather all of them and bring them together to try and create something great.
Can I just ask if it gets to that point that teachers are involved, classroom teachers are involved in that co-creation part? Because it really is difficult. I never forget asking after my third year of teaching, I asked a veteran teacher, I thought it was supposed to get easier the more you taught. And she said, oh no, there's always more added that we have to do. And it's just gotten to that point where I don't know how much more. So it can't be an add-on. So that I think is really key. And teachers need to be involved, classroom teachers, in the decision-making process. Obviously, I'm jumping ahead, but that's what I do. Sorry.
No, that's important. It's necessary.
And when I was
Right.
referring to field trips, I meant the district innovation transportation specifically. So they're not all neighboring towns. If it was a site in Starkborough and they were being bused from New Haven, well, no, because that would be the early ed one. Moncton, well, okay. And you get the idea though. All the back roads, it just adds a lot of transportation. Well, thank you.
Okay, Herb Olson is the next on the list.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. I'm a little challenged here. Thanks for organizing this. I think it's helpful. It's nice to have a Q&A and a bit of a discussion. For so many reasons, I really wonder if the administration and the board would consider pushing out this a little bit. Instead of, trying to force a decision over the next, not force, but, have a timeline when you're trying to make a decision over the next, 2 to 3 months or so. A bunch of reasons for that. First, we're in a pandemic. There's a lot of people under stress. I suspect I've heard from younger parents in particular that this is just a very difficult time to manage everything. And it seems like this is really so important, especially for parents who are seeing, have kids that are going to be going through the system, for them to really be able to deal with, these choices. Second, I think a little more time would really give an opportunity to collect data, financial data, other data, and really try to analyze it. In terms of not just the administration's recommendation, which I think has some merit to it, but also other alternatives that have been put out there. It strikes me that, the sort of choices being framed between accepting the administration recommendation and doing nothing. I don't think that a lot of people see the choices but they just haven't been able to get the information and the time to really consider whether there are other options that would make sense. Third, well, I guess goes along. I mean, the community really, I think, needs more than a couple of months to try to sort out, what's in the best interests of the community and kids' education. I also think, they need a vote, and you don't need to have a vote, I think, on town meeting day to make this decision. I know the administration doesn't think we need to have a vote to repurpose, but I think for a lot of reasons it would be a good idea. But you don't need to have it on town meeting day. You can certainly have a special election, sometime during the next year where you could get that done. And frankly, the money isn't going to be saved this year either. So I don't see any real compelling need to make this decision, in such a short time frame. And finally, I think the board did a very good job of, I think it was back in January, of setting out a plan for trying to consider, some changes of this magnitude. The Community Engagement Committee did a good job, I think, in identifying through meetings with the community core educational values. And then when the board got together in January, they asked the administration to do a bunch of things, consider, what changes should be made in light of those community values. They posed a bunch of what they called essential questions. And then they outlined a bunch of options to be studied. I think that was a good process. I think you just need more time to fully carry out that plan. I just don't see it happening over the next 2 to 3 months. I totally understand that we're in financial difficulties, and I think people are willing to make changes. They just need a bit more time, I think, to flesh out, what the options are and really think about it. So again, looping back to the original question, would the board and the administration consider pushing this process off a bit?
I can take a first stab at that, and then certainly any board member that wants to speak, I'm happy to jump in. I think you make a lot of really good points, Herb. The timeline is based on the assumption that if there's going to be a vote, that it goes out on town meeting day out of respect to people and trying to get the best turnout for a vote possible. That's not something that's required. As you said, it can be a vote that happens outside of town meeting day. So that's something that the board could consider. For me, the important piece to understand around the timing is if there isn't a decision by this time or really earlier than this time next year, then we can't factor in whatever savings we might realize from the decision in the budget building process for FY23. And that's concerning because there are a couple of things that may make FY23 a really, really hard budget year. I feel like, I don't even know how to quantify this anymore because I feel like every year I'm saying how it's a difficult budget year, though this year with the hold harmless from the legislature on our average daily membership, it was building FY22 is not as hard as it was expected to be. But not doing that work this year is going to catch up with us in FY23 because that hold harmless goes away. All that to say that depending on a couple of factors that are outside of our control, in FY23, we could be looking at needing to save well over $4 million in spending. That translates into, I don't know, something in the 40-odd position range. So by not acting at least ahead of that time frame, we aren't going to be in a position to do some restructuring to reduce those 40-odd positions in a way that helps sustain or improve programming. And it would be a significant impact to then the supports and the services that we do offer our students. So for me, that's the biggest driving window of time. If we miss the opportunity to take advantage of some savings through restructuring for FY23, it could have a significant negative impact on our students. That's what I'm just trying to avoid. And really that for me that's the basis for everything that I'm working to do, is to avoid actions that I feel strongly are going to negatively impact our students. It's on the horizon. Our projections, their projections. The one thing I can promise is they are not exactly the right numbers when we're looking at those things. There's too many moving targets to have that exact. What I am confident in is that our trajectory, as demonstrated by those figures, is the trajectory that we're on. Everything points in that direction. So my interest is in taking action ahead of damage to students and really harming our students and the services we provide, rather than waiting to experience that and then acting. So some flexibility, but there's a need for some urgency as well.
Dora, can I ask a follow-up question? Because I thought I heard something interesting there. Patrick, I appreciate that, and I have no desire, to put stuff off until, we have harm to students in our system. But what I was hearing you say was, we do have a little bit of window in time to sort some of this out a little bit more. I totally understand you need to get this sort of restructuring process in the works. So by the time you have the next fiscal year budget, you're on the right path there for savings. But you know, again, I just would like to see it pushed off. I'd be interested hearing from Dawn about her thoughts on you know, just giving us everybody a little more time to work this out.
Patrick, do you want Dawn to speak to that, or should we move on?
I think Don, Krista, whomever, or if no one has any comment for that, then that's, I suppose that's acceptable too.
Can Herb just repeat it? My audio is bad, and so I missed the tail end of what he said. Dawn, can you just repeat it?
Oh yeah, sure. So I was a little long-winded, Don, but basically I was wondering whether the administration and the board have considered pushing this process out a little bit, not to postpone it indefinitely, but you know, be able to do things before you really have to get a restructuring budget in place, but you know, trying to push it off beyond the 2 to 3 months that I think the timeline has it in now, which I don't think there's enough time for the community to really grapple with this.
So at this point, we haven't talked about any postponement or any of that. At this point, we've been looking at a timeline and working towards that end of the timeline. It's not to say that we wouldn't consider that when we have all that information from the survey and from these meetings. There's nothing to say that we wouldn't consider that as an option, kind of thing. We will be looking at all this and then thinking about, you know, our students and their education. So I can't say no, but I can't say yes, because we just are really going to be looking at all the information. I have encouraged board members not to get into deep discussion about it amongst themselves, or that, you know, until we have all the information in front of us, then we should have a discussion that encompasses all the information we have.
Krista, was there anything you wanted to add to that? No.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Barry Olson.
Hello, this is Jacqueline, actually. I was wanting to know if there's going to be staff reduction even with the new proposal. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that, you know, a lot of towns die if their elementaries leave, and repurposing is fine, but that still isn't having an elementary in the town that would draw new people to that town. Those are my questions.
Yeah, so can you repeat the first question? I started thinking about the second question. Lost
Yeah.
the first one.
The first question was, is there going to be staff reduction with the proposal that you've made?
Yeah, so that's it. There really isn't a way to find significant savings, which is certainly what we're faced with finding, without staffing reductions. Staffing makes up about 75% of our budget. So absolutely, yes, no matter what, to find these savings, there will be staffing reductions, and they will need to look similar to the staffing reductions that I'm proposing. So in the sort of, I'm hesitant to say worst case scenario because I feel like it can always get worse, but what we think maybe it could be the worst case scenario now of that 8.7 million over the next 5 years, that 91 positions. We're gonna have to find something like that no matter what scenario moves forward. And the question really is, we can find that by trying to hold on to what we have now or something close to what we have now and reduce 15 to 20 positions a year each year for the next 5 years. Or we can, in anticipation of that, we can really think differently about how should we structure ourselves to be able to withstand that staffing reduction that needs to happen no matter what, while maintaining or perhaps even enhancing the support and services we're providing our students? So the answer is yes. We have to find those staffing reductions no matter what. And your second question, remind me of the second question. I've lost that. It's two-parters. So I'll get better hopefully as we go on.
It was that Lincoln, well, any town, when their K-1 leaves, the town tends to die. And Lincoln's numbers for the elementary has stayed pretty consistent as far as elementary schools go. And a lot of people come to Lincoln because there's an elementary school here. And if we lose that, even repurposed, we're going to lose people coming to the town.
Yeah, I think, so I guess the first part I want to address is it used to be true that Lincoln's enrollment was stable. That is no longer true. Lincoln may actually be the school losing students most rapidly right now. 5 years ago, 4 years ago, Lincoln's enrollment was 115, 118, something like that. As of right now, today, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 82 or 84 students. Projections 5 years out put it between 65 and 70 students. So enrollment at Lincoln is not stable anymore. It was for a long time. It is no longer. And I think I've heard from several people the idea that part of the reason why people move to various towns, not just Lincoln, but Lincoln included, is because of the school that the town has. And that is true for some people. I think if that were an attractant to lots of people, my question would be, where are they now? If that was the main draw, we should expect to see enrollment stable or growing in our towns that have these small schools. What we are in fact seeing is the opposite. People are not moving into those small towns. We're not seeing growth or even stabilization of enrollment in those towns. So there's something else at play there than what I think the common narrative is about why people move to or move out of our towns. And I think the other piece about, if the school's repurposed and that perhaps having a similar impact to a school closure on that town and its ability to draw people in, what I think is hard to know, and I haven't seen any studies on, is how do we weigh the impact of not having a school, or even more complicated, repurposing a school in a town, with the impact of keeping a school, but having it so under-resourced that the education that's provided there loses a lot of its quality. I think that also could have a really detrimental impact on a town. And that becomes harder to parse out than comparing a town keeping a really well-resourced, high-functioning school or not having a school at all. Like, people can draw conclusions pretty quickly with that comparison. But I think when we compare repurposed to dramatically under-resourced, I think that gets harder to draw that comparison.
Okay, Michael Fisher, are you still here?
He had to leave.
Okay. Newman, you're next.
Hello, I'm Laura Newman, and I was just wondering if Patrick or the board could make available the financial analyses that form the basis of your recommendation. I'm somebody who likes to look at numbers. It really helps me wrap my head around the scope of a problem and its various solutions, and it's probably others in the community like that. And in the spirit of transparency, I think it's really important to provide these for everyone to consider. And it seems like I didn't find them anywhere. I looked all over the website and I didn't find this information, and it seems like it hasn't been shared. And according to my neighbor, Jeff Meller's recent post, it wasn't even shared with the facilities feasibility subcommittee. And that seems a little off. So I'm just hoping that it will be provided for us to consider this month.
Yeah, I can speak to that some. So the first thing is there are many. There are many documents that kind of produce the figures that you see summarized in the couple of presentations, and they're summarized in a couple of different ways in even just the presentations I've done so far. And some of those documents for sure we can make public, and others we really can't. In particular, ones where we start looking at possible staffing levels by position, by school across the district in these future scenarios. We're small enough that that becomes really identifiable really quickly. And that can have an impact on a really negative impact on our current staff. And so I have to protect that impact that it can have on our staff as we're making these projections. So some of those things really can't be made public for that reason. Other things can be made public. So we're currently working through a process to really identify what could be public and what can't be public as we think about sharing those supporting documents.
And I would like to have everyone look at our video number 2 that we did, because that does have a lot of financial information for the big picture. It has a lot about building capacity and projected number of kids we're going to have. So I mean, I think we've been trying to be very transparent, and now we have more information to get and be, certainly as board members, we want to see that too. I'm sure is that your last name Newman, or is your first name Newman?
That is my last name.
I was guessing. So anyway, what's your first name?
Laura.
Laura, sorry about that. So yeah, we're certainly waiting to get more numbers from Patrick. I'm on the board, so anyway. But all that other information is, the background stuff is there. And, certainly we've been trying to be transparent. We've had meetings, lots of meetings, and certainly the next board meeting is next Tuesday. And certainly we're going to probably get some more numbers then too. So thank you.
And I should share too that, I mentioned that there's some documents I can't make public in an effort to really protect staff that we currently have from the impact of these projections that are just that, projections 5 years out. So subject to a lot of change. But I do intend to go deeper into details with the board on some of those documents. We can't do it in public session because of the employment implications that it would suggest. But I do think it's important for the board to have a deeper understanding of those numbers, and I can share that information with them in a way that doesn't make it public, but that way the board has that deeper knowledge as they have to weigh this. So again, I apologize, there's some things I can't make public, but there's nothing I can't share with the board. It's just a matter of how I get to share it with the board to protect those rights for folks.
Lisa is the next speaker. Lisa, are you still here?
Yep, I couldn't get myself unmuted. I'm Lisa Dodon, and I'm a Starksboro resident. I have my question sort of piggybacks a little bit on Herb's and another question related to earlier discussion. I've written this down. My feeling about the innovative school proposition is that making a decision about that is premature right now. And a lot of that is given the fact that the dearth of information that we've gotten about it. I was here earlier and saw some of the ideas that were on the slide earlier. All those ones are related to other organizations that are going to charge money. And I feel like, so the part of piggybacks to Herb's is giving more time. Co-creation, if it happens afterwards, to me seems like a recipe for failure or potential failure. And the other thing is, on a couple of those slides, it said there may be an opportunity to do an innovative site, and when and if we do, if I read those slides correctly. So to me, the premature part is how it's being presented. Is this really going to happen? And is there any way to have a committee or a group of people who would be doing these innovative centers, you know, have a chance to come up with really real ideas. In terms of transportation, I've heard several people ask about transportation, both to the innovative centers and to the various permutations of the schooling. And I have not heard any satisfactory response in terms of how long it would, you know, the reality of it really sticking to 45 minutes, which is a long time anyway. But anyway, so I'd like those two questions answered, if they make sense.
I can take a stab at this. So I think that the first question that comes to mind that I think you asked was, are these innovation centers going to happen or not going to happen, given the statement about may be possible? If the recommendation is acted upon by the board, then those would happen. That's not so much the question. The question is, we don't know yet that the board's going to act in favor of my recommendation. So that's where the may happen comes from. And the transportation piece is, it needs further study to get exact numbers. And when we look at the grand scheme of things, our total, I don't know if Floyd knows off the top of his head, our total cost for all of our transportation to get kids to and from school in all 5 towns is, I think, just north of $1 million.
1.5.
1.5. So when we're talking about savings of $5.5 million annually from the restructuring, if the 1.5 becomes 1.6 or 1.7 to increase the number of bus runs to get our students on the buses to a reasonable time, like that, it becomes relatively insignificant in terms of the scope of what we're working with in terms of dollars. So transportation is something to figure out. It isn't the thing that will make or break what we do, if that's helpful.
A little bit, except that you've also said that we're still going to be in trouble financially, given the, now I can't remember the term, that we're still going to have trouble financially even with these changes.
Right. And what that calls to question is, if we don't benefit from some of those other factors that could go a couple of different ways, or if we don't additionally benefit from a merger and the savings that accompany that, our ability to sustain, in particular, our ability to sustain the innovation sites comes into question. And from there,
is there any, oh, sorry,
looking for more savings.
Yeah, is there any way to do more specific planning about the innovation centers before the board has to vote on it, given the fact that it's like voting on something you don't know what it is?
Well, and that's sort of the push and the pull. Vote on something that you don't know that would be co-created, or spend months co-creating something to have the decision be not to do something. So that's sort of the rub. The idea was, if this advances, and when we know this advances, then we devote the time and the resources of the community, of students, of staff, to do that co-creation. To invest that time without any confidence that it's actually going to happen doesn't seem like a great use of time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Mary O'Brien is next.
There, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. Sorry, Mary, you're muted. I could hear you when you asked if I could hear you, but then you went to mute.
Now can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay. I am a retired teacher. I live in Starksboro. I did teach towards the end of my career at Starksboro. One of the questions that I have, actually, they have been spoken about, but one of my concerns is that the question about, well, the cost of busing to the to the two schools that would change their function would be happening more than once a day. So if we talk about 1.5 million for twice a day, and you're talking about busing people a variety of times from other buildings or from their home to those innovation centers, I think that that could actually be more expensive than what you might think. So that's one concern, as far as you wouldn't have to create the whole program, but you could look more deeply into the busing costs and what that might be. I'm concerned about that. I agree with Ruth that I think that K-5 students really need to be closer and not bused as far as we're thinking they would be. And I think that it's more helpful. I think that there is a large impact to the towns to remove the elementary schools and I think that we're not really sure, given that we are in COVID, what will be happening next year. And I think that it's hard to make decisions now based on COVID not being done and not knowing what's going to happen to our schools. So I guess I don't have a clear question right now, but I would just suggest that we perhaps, as Herb had suggested, push out the time limit so that we can get more of our questions. And one is reflecting on what is going to be the impact once COVID is over. So I don't really need an answer at this point.
You did remind me of a thought, though, that came up when Ruth was speaking earlier, and that is what's tricky about our financial situation is the way we realize, so the way we realize savings is by staffing reductions. I think I've made that point clear. The options for realizing those staffing reductions are some combination of reduce staff while creating efficiencies by having students under fewer roofs. That maintains programming and supports. The other option is reduce staff without bringing students under fewer roofs. And that has a very high likelihood of significantly reducing the supports and services. So I hear the interest of keeping K-5 kids closer. And I hear and agree that sixth graders, having been a former sixth grade teacher at Bristol, sixth graders are more ready for middle school than they are interested in staying in their elementary school, has been my experience. But the challenge is we don't find the savings, we don't find sufficient savings even by keeping our K-5 kids in 5 buildings. Savings, and again, we find the savings no matter what, because I don't think our community would support really steep tax increases, and it comes from personnel. But it's really about the efficiencies created by students being under fewer roofs that helps us maintain programming and supports, as opposed to risking losing. So that's the rub, and that's the real tricky part.
Kristen.
Hi, can you see me?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I'm in my bedroom because I am doing the full-on remote with my children. So they're at VES right now. Hopefully there won't be screaming in the background soon. I'm a New Haven mom of 2 kids, a first and third grader. And I just wanted to make sure I understood this correctly when and if Beeman, my school, Starksboro, and Lincoln, if they are repurposed, that would save money because there would be staff cuts. Because if we would still be paying for the heat and the maintenance of these buildings because they would still be in use. So I guess I'm kind of confused as to how that's enough of a saving, because paying for heat for 3 buildings in Vermont, paying for the upkeep, seems like that would still be a lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah, I can speak to that some. So when we look at the repurposing scenario, we're projecting those savings to be $5.5 million a year from the staffing efficiencies. So and the operational costs that you referred to, heating, plowing, keeping the lights on, those sorts of things. Of that $5.5 million in savings, $240,000 is operational costs of the two buildings, thinking about Robinson and Lincoln. So that demonstrates really that the savings, it isn't a significant expense to keep the lights on and keep the heat, relatively speaking. If we had a $240,000 heat bill for our house, that would be outrageous. But from a grand scheme of things, $240,000 to keep the lights on and the snow plowed and the lawn mowed and the heat going is insignificant relative to the $5.5 million in savings, or $5.25 million in savings that we would see from the personnel efficiencies. So that's why thinking about our facilities as assets as opposed to liabilities, there's relatively little cost to keep those buildings operating. The greater cost is putting staff in those buildings to provide the kind of program that we're looking to provide. So I think that answers your question, but certainly let me know if I missed something.
Yeah, that was it. Thank you.
Erin of Erin's iPhone.
Hey, Adora, it's Erin Heisinga. Thank you for this opportunity. I know it's nice to hear everyone's thoughts. I wanted to start, I do agree with Coco, her concern that 7 board members, their schools won't be impacted or repurposed, and 6 board members will. So that obviously, I know the board members will, come together and obviously think of all aspects, but that's just a concern I have. I find that I get my thoughts across more clearly by writing them than winging it. So forgive me if it sounds like I'm reading, but I did put something together here. So my name is Erin Heisinga and I live in Starksboro. I have a daughter who is currently in 3rd grade at Robinson School. Under your proposal, our possible reality is the following. She would attend 4th grade at Robinson, 5th grade at either Bristol or Moncton. She would possibly be separated from half of her friends and classmates because the proposal might split some in Bristol and some in Moncton. She would then go 6th to 8th grade at Regents, which is 35 plus minutes from our home by car. And I know the busing has been talked about a lot, so I won't get into that. But that's considerably longer by bus. And we live right on 116, so we're one of the lucky ones. We're not up in South Starksboro, which would be significantly longer. And then she would go 9th through 12th at Mount Abe. So seeing as how the theme of COVID-19 has been to keep a sense of normalcy and consistency for all children, I'm just curious how bouncing around for between 4 schools for the remainder of her next 8 years is going to have a positive effect on her social and emotional well-being. We are lucky that she adapts well. She's a rock star. She can, go with the flow. But a lot of kids are not like that. A lot of kids are really going to struggle with this constant change. Lastly, I feel like the merger with Virgins appears to be rushed. Assuming the merger does occur, that would be a superintendent position for one much larger district. I'm assuming that you would be in the running for that position, which I also assume, correct me if I'm wrong, would come with a pay increase. I'm curious if that factor or possibility played into your proposal. I have read, and I could be wrong here as well, that the current ANWSD superintendent is either retiring or resigning. So the timing seems interesting to me, and the possible increase of a superintendent position and salary, while a significant amount of other positions are eliminated, just doesn't look great to me at face value. And I want to say, I hope I don't offend you with that question, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. It's just an elephant that I do see in the room. In closing, I will say that I do not envy your position at all. I do appreciate the time and effort that you took with your proposed solution. I know things cannot remain the same and that there is no perfect solution, but to me, it seems that there are too many unknowns and to be determined factors to have the board vote on this drastic change so quickly. Thank you.
Yeah, and I can respond to the superintendent position. So there's no, I may be in the running, but there's no guarantees about my future as a superintendent in this region under this consolidation. And in fact, my thinking about the salary piece, I would suggest that it doesn't change. I don't think it would need to change. I don't think our merged district doesn't look that much different than a lot of other districts that currently exist in the state. And I think the compensation that is offered in either one of the two superintendent positions in these districts now is reflective of what is a typical compensation around the state. So I don't think there's any, that hasn't factored in at all to my thinking. In fact, the proposal to reduce central offices by half in these two districts only is a risk to me and my position in my future. The great benefit is typically there's 15 to 25% of the superintendents in the state change over every year. So there's a lot of job security in the superintendent market. So I'll land on my feet somewhere no matter what. This isn't about me. This is about what makes sense for our region, and really specifically for our students.
Okay, Rob Buckland.
I want to thank everyone for showing up. My name is Rob Backlund. I'm the father of a 1.5-year-old up in Lincoln. I'm also one of the Lincoln representatives on the MAUSD school board. So, Patrick, there's a question I've just been churning in my head for actually since August from our school board retreat when we looked at some of these numbers aside from your recommendation. And, even looking at your recommendation, I feel like, 5 years out for all this to work, we need a lot of chips to fall in line that are outside of our power. And we need a lot of assumptions in those numbers to really, I think, go the way we'd like them to, in or outside margins of error. And then that still comes with basically, it sounds like close to a third of MAUSD staff possibly losing their jobs. And we're just barely falling underneath the spending threshold. And I just see us back here again in 5 years, unfortunately, talking about sort of the next merger and the next school closure. And I guess, really long term, like I'm trying to put my long view hat on here. Are we operating in a system that truly isn't making school districts in the state sustainable? I just see that we're trying to basically build towards equity of no opportunity for our children to go to school locally. And it just sort of, it does not sit right in my stomach. And I just wonder, do you really think, like, is this a long-term solution to the problems we're facing?
Yeah, I think, that's a great question, Rob. And you touched upon some of it. I shared some of the projections and the different variables that could go a lot of different ways. And that doesn't include variables that show up between now and 5 years out from now. There may be variables that pop up that aren't even on our radar right now. That's what makes it really hard. Like I don't get to be in a place where I can guarantee everyone on this screen that this proposal will last us for the rest of our careers or the rest of our lives or the rest of our kids' experiences. There are too many moving parts to that. I can't think of a path forward that comes closer to being sustainable for the long run than what I'm proposing. Having said that, it may fall short depending on how lots of different things go 4 or 5 or 6 years down the road, maybe longer, at which point we'll have to assess the situation with the information we have at the time, consider what the options are. I've heard a lot of people raise the question about, why are we talking about a merger just with Addison Northwest? Why isn't it a countywide thing? That may be something that makes sense. And that could be something that we explore further down the road. But if we can't take a first step in that direction of considering a merger with one other district, how do we jump right to an even bigger step of merging countywide with 3 school districts? So as long as Vermont continues to lose students, and historically they've been losing 1,000 students from its education system each year, this is a problem that wouldn't go away. And so, 2/3 of education, 2/3 of property taxes are education expenses. There's a lot of belief that part of why Vermont's demographic is aging is because of the cost of living in Vermont. And we have to, and I think the structures that are in place are forcing us to address our contribution to the cost of living in Vermont, which is presumed to be a driving factor in our demographic, that if we don't change, there isn't a path out of this scenario. So it becomes really complicated when we start to factor in the state level challenges that I just articulated. And again, as I've said in other meetings, I think the hard conversations we're having, which again are not unique to us, there are other districts having these very same conversations, are not unintentional. In a state that loses 1,000 students from its school system a year, who sets spending thresholds on a cost per pupil basis, it is intended to put districts in the position we're in to have these hard conversations and wrestle with how do we control cost. It's not done to be hurtful by any means, I don't think. It's done to be future focused and address and acknowledging that we need to address this demographic that, if we don't turn it around as a state, only makes our current situation more difficult as time goes on. I don't know if that really addresses your question, Rob, other than to say there's no guarantees in this, and we're going to have to continue to figure out with the information we have at the time, how do we move forward to meet our financial obligations and pursue improved outcomes for students. And what we do locally has an impact on what happens at the state level, vice versa. What the state does at the state level impacts what we can do locally.
If I could add one, oh, Adora, could I add one small thing?
Sure.
So my daughter's at Boston University today taking 2 final exams. And when she got there, she's a sophomore. She talked to the other students there about, especially in the STEM area, what they could take at their high schools as compared to what she could take at Mount Abe. My daughter got a wonderful education at Mount Abe, but from what we heard from children from other parts of the United States and the other countries in the world, Mount Abe is already an under-resourced school in regards to STEM, tremendously. So I'm talking just about possible mergers with other high schools, tremendously under-resourced in regards to STEM, even though the kids are getting a good education. What kids are getting in other parts of the country are tremendously more options, depth, etc. So I just want to talk about that end of it, looking at it as a parent who has a child out of the school district. And I see Rob certainly is looking from the other end. I just wanted to add that. And I think we also need to, I appreciate that Patrick's proposal really addresses that achievement for kids on free and reduced lunch, kids on IEPs has been completely flat for the 9 years that I've been on the board. And that those, I think I'm going to use this word, and it's a trigger. The privileged kids are going to do okay no matter where they go to school, and it's the other kids I'm worried about. So I'll just end with that. Thank you.
We have 3 more speakers, and we're pretty much at the end of our time. So I think we'll probably keep it to these 3 speakers. We're good to go with them, Patrick.
Sure.
Okay. Paul Forlenza.
Sorry, Paul, you're muted.
I always say, why don't other people unmute quicker? I live in Lake on the select board. Last night we had a select board meeting, and part of the meeting was dedicated to talking about your recommendations and going forward in Lincoln. There were probably 12, maybe 15 people there, all of them concerned. Somebody brought up that the preschool in Lincoln now has about 28 or 30 students. And some of us are trying to weigh that with the declining enrollment that's been noted in Lincoln. And we're sort of wondering whether the last couple of years have been outliers or not. So we'd like to ask the parents of the preschool kids, do they intend to send their kids to Lincoln Elementary School if it were there? And then to try to survey the rest of the community to see how many potential kids there are who would go to the elementary school in Lincoln. Lots of people tell stories about people moving into Lincoln specifically for the elementary school. We don't have hard numbers about that. And so we'd like to collect those. Is there any way that there's some resource in the district that could help us with that, A, and B, if we could demonstrate that we could get back up to historic levels, would that make a difference in your decision?
Yeah, so in terms of the resource portion of the question, I think, yes, we have a pre-K coordinator that probably knows well what's going on at the Lincoln Cooperative Preschool. She comes to mind as a possible resource in terms of who's there. One of the questions that you may consider asking too is, where are the students in that preschool from? Because I don't think it's exclusively the town of Lincoln. So that may be part of what seems to be a disconnect between what you're seeing for numbers there and what the projections are. Yeah, I mean, I think part of what we'd have to wrestle with is what information you provide compared to the NESDEC projections and what makes sense. And but I think if you collect information and share it, I think we'd have to take that into consideration and thinking about what impact that would or wouldn't have on our path forward. So if you want to send me an email, Paul, I can try to connect you with our pre-K coordinator as a resource.
Okay. Just a personal observation. You're in a very tough position. I appreciate the work that you're doing in the manner that you're doing it. And you're under pressure from factors that you have no control over, and neither do the rest of us. We've got changing demographics. We've got taxpayers' concerns. We've got a governor who's convinced we ought to reduce costs. So I'm appreciative of your position and the board's position and how difficult this is. The other sentiment that was expressed last night was folks in Lincoln really do want the opportunity to vote on this. And it seems to me, if your proposal is as good as you and the board think it is, then there's no reason not to give the towns the opportunity to vote on this and not to commingle the votes, to simply let's see what every town wants to do. So thanks, appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay, Coco has an additional question.
Sure. Thank you for taking an additional question and comment. You know, I'm really worried that the majority of the board's mind is already made up on this. And, you know, I see the proposal as really harmful to children and students in Lincoln and Starksboro and New Haven especially, and harmful to the communities as a whole. I would really like to hear from the chair of the board, you know, how the community voice is affecting your thinking on the proposal and your decision-making process. I know that there's been, you know, lots of opportunity for community engagement, but as a community member, I really feel like I keep getting a sales pitch and not an engagement with the real concern parents have and the real concern community members have about the education of their children. You know, my discussions with other families in Lincoln and folks who have kids in the elementary school and folks who will have kids in the elementary school really, you know, drives home the point that this is harmful to our kids in Lincoln. And I really want to hear from the chair of the board how you are taking this community voice into account as you consider possibly voting on this. And I want to say I really appreciate Paul's comment that, you know, this really needs to go to a community vote, and those votes should not be commingled among the towns. Thank you so much.
I can speak for myself at this point as a board member, and I can say that I have not made up my mind whether to follow the recommendation or whether to pursue something else, because really I'm waiting to look at it, all the information all together. I have been involved in the events 18 months ago. I have been regularly involved in the meetings throughout the course. I'm listening and I'm considering things. And when we started out this, we really thought the only option was to close schools. I'm happy that there was another option, that it just wasn't close the schools and be done kind of thing. So I'm reading the comments from people. I'm taking them to heart. I had children in the school district. I understand what it means to have a local school. I also understand, after almost 20 years on the board, how this keeps unfolding, that we're losing more and more students. So I'm taking so many factors into consideration as I make my decision, as well as from what I hear in people in my community. And I'm also considering the people I'm not hearing from, because I know there are people who are struggling getting their kids a great education, struggling to pay their taxes. And I'm concerned about the people that aren't able to come and aren't brave enough, or don't have the courage, or in a position where they can't come and say, I'm really struggling, my kids are struggling. You have got to make a decision and find a way through this. So I'm open to hearing what people have to say, and I'm waiting for us as a board to have all that information and to sit together and talk about what are we going to do.
And I really will urge the board to, these innovation sites are not schools. From what I hear, they will be, barely staffed. The possibility that kids will go once a year is what I saw in Patrick's slide. Once a year, that is not an education, an innovative education. There is innovative education happening at the Lincoln Community School right now. And that's going to be stripped from this community instead of expanded to the wider community of MAUSD. Instead of bringing kids to a school that is so valued and has a lot of, parent engagement, is really highly ranked among schools across Vermont. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's one of the, highest ranking elementary schools among the district. And to close that school, along with the other small schools that are working for kids and families, to me is just really immoral, in the wrong way to move about some of these questions. So I'm sorry for taking up so much time, but I'm really passionate about this, and I will continue to stay engaged and continue to, participate in these conversations. But I worry that the board's mind is already made up.
Can I just speak to that briefly? Coco, I'll just add to what Don said to say that I don't believe any member of the board is taking this lightly or has made up their mind about anything. And this is a huge decision for all of us. And I think all of us are really struggling with it. And so I would just ask that we assume good intentions among the people that are volunteering a lot of time to really make sure we do right by all members of our community. And that we, I don't think any one of us has said, this is absolutely what we should do, and there's no question about it, regardless of where we live.
But the innovation sites, to me, feels like a sales pitch. It's like saying, this used car, you're never gonna have to fix anything on it. I really just want to call to attention that does not feel honest and fair, and like, that Lincoln Community School still remains a school, or Starksboro, or Beeman as well. I really think that the board needs to be honest and upfront about the fact that an innovation site is not a school. So I know we're over time. I'm really going to.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, the last person on our list is Barry Olson, and I remember that it wasn't really Barry Olson, but I can't remember who it was.
It's okay, it's Jacqueline. Just thank you all for doing this. And then the other thing is piggybacking off of Coco, because it would be an innovative center, it wouldn't be an elementary school anymore per se. So strongly, like Paul said, it would be nice to see it go to a vote for the communities rather than just be made without the community input and buying into it. That's it. Have a good day.
Okay, I think since that wasn't a question, that was just advisory to the board. I think that we're done with our questions. I thank you so much for attending and for sticking it out this long. I don't think we lost too many people along the way. It's a riveting topic, highly emotional. I'm so grateful that you're also invested to be here this morning. Is there anything else you wanted to say, Patrick?
No, just echoing what you just said. Thanks to everyone for being here and sharing the range of reactions, opinions, thoughts. It's helpful as we continue to move this forward. Has been helpful for a long time and will continue to be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.